The Liberation Army, that's what Iran is calling its newly formed Shia fighting force. It will be under the Islamic Revolutionary Guard and will be sent to various regional battlefields. But what's behind the force? And what will it mean for conflicts in the region? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Well, the conflicts in Iraq, Syria and Yemen have long been called proxy wars. Russia, the US and Saudi Arabia all involved. And it's no secret Iran has played its part too, backing President Bashar al-Assad in Syria, advising Shia militias in Iraq and supporting Houthi fighters in Yemen. Well, now Iran has made its involvement official. On Friday, a senior Iranian commander announced the formation of a so-called Liberation Army, whose units will be deployed to the 3 Arab countries. So why has Iran made this public statement now? Lots to discuss with our guests. But first, Natasha Ghanem has this report.
In a rare move, a senior military official in Iran has admitted its involvement in a battle on 3 fronts. Commander Mohammad al-Falaki says it's overseeing militia, mostly made up of Shiite foreign fighters in Syria, Yemen and Iraq.
So if any sectarian conflict is spread in the region, Iran can be one of the targets, and its own security would be a target to that. So Iran doesn't have any interest in following any approach for paying attention to sectarian conflict.
It's called the Liberation Army. It's thought to have as many as 200,000 foreign fighters. It's part of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard. It's fighting alongside troops backing President Bashar al-Assad in Syria, while in Iraq it's battling ISIL. And in Yemen, the Liberation Army is supporting Houthi rebels against forces aligned with President Abd Abu Mansur Hadi. A military official says Iran will supervise, train, and finance local forces. Iran's Revolutionary Guard was born out of the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Part of its mandate is to defend the country from threats beyond its borders, while upholding the revolution's ideals. Since it first deployed troops during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, it has expanded its mission. For decades, the Revolutionary Guard has been supplying weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. Now the admission that Iran is involved in 3 active regional conflicts could have far-reaching consequences. Natasha Ghanem, Al Jazeera.
Well, Iran's Liberation Force will be led by longtime General Qasem Soleimani. He's already the head of the Revolutionary Guard Corps' elite Quds Force, and he's treated as somewhat of a celebrity in Iran. Soleimani has commanded Shia militias in Iraq in their fight against ISIL, and Syrian opposition leaders say the Iranian commander has coordinated attacks and trained militias for the Assad government. Let's bring in our guest then into the show. We have joining us from Tehran, Mohammad Marandi. He's a professor at the University of Tehran. In Jeddah, we have Khaled Batarfi, an assistant professor at Faisal University and columnist with the Saudi Gazette. And Kenneth Katzman, Iran expert with the non-partisan Congressional Research Service in Washington, D.C. Good to have you with us. If I could start with Mohammad Marandi, what is the mandate of such a force?
Well, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding because I actually searched for the interview. Contrary to what was said on the website, this is not the commander of the Revolutionary Guards. And I've never heard of the person, but he was speaking about a liberation force, not a specific organization. And he was basically repeating what we all already know, and that the Iranians are taking Afghanistani volunteers who live in Iran to Syria, as well as Iraqi forces. And these are predominantly Shia. He also said that there are Sunni forces as well. In fact, some of the Revolutionary Guards who were killed by extremists in Syria, they are Sunni. I've actually met a couple of family members in a ceremony here in Tehran a while back. And I also think it's important to recall or to point out that Iran has a history of supporting all sorts of groups, and I think that the Wahhabi state in Saudi Arabia would like to make this sectarian, but Iran traditionally supported Hamas and Islamic Jihad, which was Sunni. Iran supported Bosnia. If it wasn't for Iran, Bosnia wouldn't exist. It is a Sunni country. And the Iranians are also supporting, alongside others, the Kurds in Iraq, which are Sunni, against ISIL. So for Iran, the fight is not this sect against that, but it is basically everyone, Muslim, Christian, and otherwise, against Wahhabism and extremists, whether it's ISIL or Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda affiliates or Boko Haram or any other group. And all of them, their ideology comes from Saudi Arabia.
All right, we'll get into the issue of sectarianism in a minute, but Mohammad, what's been quoted in Mashregh News talks about the establishment of a specific group. It talks about even the countries that it is supposed to be operating in or will be deployed in: Iraq, Syria. Mohammad Falaki is quoted as saying, quote, "The main goal is the creation of the first generation of the Shia Liberation Army to erase Israel," he says, in 23 years, which is now on its border. Let's take the view perhaps to Kenneth Katzman. Is this misquotes and a complete misunderstanding of Iran's approach to the region?
I wrote a book on the Revolutionary Guard, and actually this is really nothing new. Actually, the Quds Force grew in several steps out of a committee or a commission called the Office of Liberation Movements, and I'm going back now to 1981, 1982. So this announcement from Commander Falaki, who I agree is not really a senior spokesperson in any way for the Guard, for the Pasdaran, the Revolutionary Guard. He's reflecting what we, as was said, what we already know. Iran is supporting movements, most of them are Shia, not exclusively, but actually he excludes a few countries where the Quds Force and Iran is involved. Particularly, there was just recently released a summary of the recent Defense Department report on Iran, and mentioned Iran being active in Lebanon and Bahrain also, where there's been a Shia uprising. But it's true, Iran sometimes does support non-Shia movements. It depends on Iran's interests. It depends on the situation. That's absolutely true. But what's been announced or talked about by Mr. Falaki is not a surprise to anybody, certainly not in the U.S. government that is following what Iran is doing in the region.
All right, let's take the thought. I know that Khaled would like to get in on some of the comments made there, so let's take some of those points back to you, that perhaps the problem emanates with Saudi Arabia. The suggestion is from Mohammad Marandi, exporting what he called Wahhabism, sectarianism, and Iran is simply, I guess, Mr. Marandi would maintain, promoting a more broad alliance of people against extremism.
Yeah, well, they would like to call their forces the Peace Corps, but we can always see the effects of these forces and the countries involved. So every country they get in with their so-called peaceful forces, we saw destruction and wars in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Yemen. And if they had their way, they will have the same in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. Now it's official. I mean, now it's open. Before the Yemenis would say, the rebels would say, we have no support, no relation with Iran. And the Iranian would say, oh, we only support them in the media and it's a political support only. Now it's obvious. They admitted that they have what they call Liberation Shia Army inside these countries, and including Yemen, by the way. And it's a relief that they are finally clear about it. At least we can tell the world what it is, and we can deal with it. I will ask your guest from Tehran, what if we did the same thing in Iran? We created a liberation army to support the groups and the communities that are rebelling now against them, the Kurds, the Arabs, and the Adaris, and the Baluchis, and others. And we give them the same thing, training, military, and maybe some armament, and maybe some soldiers, Sunni soldiers from other countries, from Afghanistan, for example. Same exact form that they are trying to do with us. What about if we do with them? Would they be happy about it? Would they think that's right?
I mean, I guess I take that point back to Mohammad then. I mean, is it not... I mean, is it really a coincidence most of the militias which Iran is supporting right now, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in Yemen, whether it's in Syria, are Shiite militias? Does Khaled not have a point when he's saying, actually, Iran is fueling sectarianism?
No, because, for example, Yemen is not a Shia country. The Houthis are Zaydis. And I'm surprised that your guest from Saudi Arabia doesn't recognize that. On the other hand, in Iraq, the majority of the population is Shia. But as I said also, that the Iranians have been supporting the Kurds.
Zaydis are seen as a branch of Shiism. They're seen closer, at least, to Shiism than the Sunnis. Zaydis are seen as Shiites. Iran has been accused by UN members even of backing Iranian Shiite militias which have been accused of committing crimes, war crimes in Iraq. I mean, there's no doubting that, really, is there?
No, that's not an accurate statement. Iran has not been backing Shia militias that have been carrying out such crimes. If I don't know what the UN has said, but this is the same UN that when they blacklisted Saudi Arabia for bombing children in Yemen and killing children, they withdrew the name because of Saudi wealth and clout. The UN Secretary General said so with shame in public. So I don't think we really should go there. No,
I can tell you what the UN said. If you're not sure, forgive me for interrupting, Mohammed, but UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Zaid Ra'ad al-Hussein spoke of hundreds of men and boys missing, executed or tortured to death by the Iranian-backed Kataib Hezbollah. This was on July the 5th, 2016.
Well, as I said, the United Nations, we know who influences the United Nations. It is Saudi Arabia. The Saudis have been removed. They've been launching a war against the people of Yemen for almost a year and a half now. They've created a blockade. They've bombed weddings, they've bombed schools, they've bombed hospitals, and they get no condemnation whatsoever. So I really don't see the UN, that is controlled largely by Western powers and funded by countries like Saudi Arabia, to be in any position to talk about the rights of these people. In Iraq has a sovereign government. It's been elected by the people, and Iran's presence in Iraq is with the consent of the Iraqi government, and the Iranians are simply there as advisors. Whenever it's suitable, groups that Iran support, they're called Shia, like the Islamic Jihad in Palestine. They're often accused by the Saudis of being Shia. Look at Syria itself, the Liwa al-Quds, which is a Palestinian group. They are fighting against the extremist forces and Al-Qaeda and ISIL alongside the Syrian government. They're Palestinian and Sunni. Or Ahmad Jibrail's group, which was massacred in the Yarmouk refugee camp, many of them by these extremist forces a couple of years ago. These are Palestinians, right, and they're Sunnis, and they're alongside the Syrian government, which is majority Sunni. In Kurdish areas, both in Syria and Iraq, you have a majority Sunni being slaughtered by Wahhabi extremists. As I said, the issue is that all the Christians, the Kurds, the Druze, the Alawites, the Sunnis, the Sufis, and the Shias, all of them are defending themselves against Wahhabi extremism. Unless we confront this reality,
all right, okay, you've made that
things are simply going to get worse. Just one point, and that is German intelligence has even
Mohammed,
said
we'll come back to you, I promise you. It's not the end of the show yet, so we're going to come back to you and give you another. Sure. But I want to pick up on a point with Kenneth there, that, you know, when Mohammed talks about, and we often hear Iranians say, you know, this isn't about sectarianism, this is about supporting, for example, they talk about the internationally recognized government in Iraq or in Syria, and yet in Yemen, of course, we see that Iran is supporting a group that is fighting the internationally recognized government in Yemen. Is there a consistency problem here?
Well, I think there is. I mean, I think my analysis, and I think this is shared with a lot of people here, is Iran is supporting its interests. And
okay, I can see Khaled wants to get in. Bear with us, Khaled.
I mean,
we'll come to you in a minute. Go ahead, Kenneth.
Iran is supporting its interests. Sometimes its interests are consistent with its overall philosophy or international law. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's Shia. Sometimes it's not necessarily. But I need to, you know, as an expert here in Washington, I need to work with official, you know, statements. And the UN report of July 21, I think, said, you know, Iran is acting inconsistent with UN Resolution 2231, which endorsed and implements the nuclear deal and says that Iran is not to export any arms outside Iran for up to 5 years without the approval of the Security Council. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon put this in his report on the record, and he was pretty explicit with regard to Syria and Yemen. So, you know, Iran is acting. It's
I'm glad you mentioned that, Kenneth. Forgive me for interrupting you too, but I'm glad you mentioned the nuclear deal there, because some would turn around and blame Washington and say, is it not the matter of the fact now is that Iran is being emboldened since the nuclear deal was signed with the West to be more open about its influence and what it's doing in the region?
No, there's been really, the nuclear deal has not affected one way or the other Iran's activities in the region. It's pretty much the same as it was before the deal.
But isn't it more open about it? Sorry, Kenneth. I mean, a few months ago, Iran was very careful about even describing what kind of soldiers or advisors it had in Syria. And now here we are talking about Mohammad Maliki talking openly about a Shia fighting force.
Falaki. No. Iran has been very open that they've been acting in Syria. They've announced the deaths of you know, senior commanders, and no, they have admitted. Mr. Jafari has admitted. Soleimani. They've been very open that they're acting in Syria. There's been really since the nuclear deal, there's been no difference. Some said Iran's activities would be increased because they would have more money. The sanctions have been lifted. That's not really true. Some said Iran would be reducing its activities in the region because it has this nuclear deal and it wants to reintegrate into the West. That hasn't happened either. So we're basically in the same situation. It's the same as it was before the nuclear deal.
All right. I promised I'll give Khaled a chance to come in, so let me give you a chance. Here you go, Khaled.
I agree with my colleague in the US that Iran has been doing what they have started to do since the start of the revolution, because the revolution came with the promise to export what they call Islamic revolution to the world, especially to the neighborhood. Interestingly, that the neighborhood is Muslims, so how could you export Islamic or Islam to Muslims? What they meant actually is Shiaism. Of course, there are Sunnis on helping them or in their allies, but they are minimum, they are few. Most of the people they support in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, the Houthis, by the way, are Shiite. If our brother in Tehran doesn't know, he should know, because Hussein al-Houthi and his son and his family were trained in Qum in the 90s, and they came back only the start of the new millennium.
Khaled, forgive me for interrupting you as well. I want to know how you'd respond to those who might say that what is happening is also partly a response to the sort of rhetoric that came out of places like Saudi Arabia, which is very much anti-Shia rhetoric that has stirred this pot of sectarianism.
Where? I mean, Saudi Arabia is contained in its borders. Where would they did that? I mean, did they go to Iran, for example, or to the Shia part of Afghanistan and started wars and sectarianism as Iran did? I wish we could only support the Arabs and the Muslims under occupation in Iran, but they didn't. The fact is, the only forces that went out of its border were the Iranian forces. They went out of this border, and now it's officially more official than before. In the past, they admitted that they sent the Revolutionary Guard to Syria and Iraq. Now they admitted also sending to Yemen. And it's obviously clear that they are intervening in Arab countries in a way that against UN rules and against their agreement with the UN.
All right, let's come back to the topic which we started on in this show, and that is this supposed liberation army. Mohammad Marandi, do you see any strategy here to move towards a regulation of all these different non-state militia actors in order to perhaps lessen some of the strain on Iranian troops so that they don't have to use so many Iranians, for example, in Syria and other places?
No, again, as I was saying, that this person who did this interview is not a known person. I had to search and find the interview.
Okay, but let's talk about a general trend.
Do
you see an Iranian trend to think how to better perhaps organize these different militias to relieve some of the strain on Iranian troops?
Well, I don't think there has been a change in the level of Iranian troops in Syria or Iraq. As your guest in the United States rightly said, Iran announces it public when someone is killed by the terrorists in Syria, the extremist al-Qaeda affiliate ISIL. It is announced in the Iranian media. With regards to Yemen, and again, the Houthis, anyone can use a search engine to see what their background is, and it's sad to make it them a sectarian group and justify the relentless bombing of the people of Yemen by the Saudis with U.S. support, by the way. And these constitute, in my opinion, crimes against humanity, and the Americans are just as responsible as the Saudi regime. But when it comes to Iraq, it's obvious that the Iranians, whether the the United Nations likes it or not,
Mohammad,
Iran is going to support the Iraqi central government.
If we then move beyond that and say, there have been, of course, a lot of criticisms by human rights organizations of the Saudi-led coalition's strikes, but there have also been criticisms of the Houthi rebels and their attacks. I mean, I can see you shaking your head. Let me give you one for an example. Human Rights Watch report, World Report 2016 says, quote, Houthi forces also committed serious law of war violations. They go on to talk about indiscriminate artillery rockets in southern cities, deploying child soldiers, unlawfully detaining aid workers, and so on and so forth. I guess my question is, from the Iranian perspective, what is the point, what is the goal of Iran's involvement in regional countries? Because in some countries they're propping up regimes, in some countries they're trying to bring down regimes. You know, however you try and put the, I don't want to say sugarcoating on it, but the headline on it, it does seem it doesn't always fit.
No, that's an unfair assessment, and I know it's posed as a question, but it's very similar to how the Palestinians and the Israelis are compared, where the Palestinians are also often accused of carrying out violations when the slaughter is obviously being carried out by the Israelis. The Ansarullah, the Houthis, the Yemenis, they're in their own land. The Saudis and others, they tried to impose a president who was the only candidate in an election. He was supposed to be president for 2 years. He overstayed his presidency. He was not legitimate. And the Saudis have been for 1.5 years slaughtering people, try to put him back in power.
All right,
and
well,
the fact that they can't is because the population is against the Saudi regime.
All right, we'll have to end it there. I'm sure there's a lot of things Khaled wanted to pick up on there. Perhaps we should mention, of course, that president is the internationally recognized one, and there is a Security Council resolution 2216 issued in April 2015 calling on the Houthis to withdraw from cities and disarm, just to put things in context. But we'll listen. I'm sure we're going to pick up on this, gentlemen, later on. So thanks to all of our guests, Mohammad Marandi, Khaled Batarfi, and Kenneth Katzman. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here for now is goodbye.